First storyteller this evening is the one, the only, Joe Charnitski. Come on, Brooklyn! How you doing, man? How are you, man? There you go. Get real close to the mic. I will. Have fun.
It is only a slight exaggeration to say that as I approached the altar of that church and I genuflected and made the sign of the cross, it's only a slight exaggeration to say I had no idea what was going to come out of my mouth as I approached that pulpit. A few days earlier, I was at my family's kitchen table with a priest and a funeral director planning my father's funeral, his obituary being finished behind them. It was all happening really fast. He just died a few hours earlier, but my mom was handling it. She was answering questions, making decisions, and the priest asked her, "Do you want to have someone say a few words at the funeral service?" And without skipping a beat, as if it had been discussed before, but it hadn't been discussed before, my mom said, "Yes, Joseph will say a few words." Now, I had given the eulogy to my grandfather's funeral, same church, 8 years earlier. His name was also Joe Charnitski. And my dad's name was Joe Charnitski. So I've been to Joe Charnitski's funeral twice in my life. And at the next Joe Charnitski funeral, I probably won't have the opportunity to give the eulogy. So I said, yes, of course, I'll say a few words. Later that night, I got a call from one of my oldest friends from childhood. And he said, how's it going? How you doing? The word had spread. And he said, look, a lot of guys are coming over tonight. We're going to hang out. Why don't you come over? And a break sounded like a good idea, so I went over. And I arrived, and all the guys gave me a hug and said, how you feeling? How's your mom doing? And, no, it's all right. I said, okay. Well, sit down. We're going to watch a movie. And that was the last time we talked that night about my dad, about how I was feeling, how my mom was doing. Instead, we watched Old School, which the Will Ferrell, Vince Vaughn classic, which had been a recent DVD release. I hadn't seen it. And man, did I laugh for 2 hours. And that's what I needed. I didn't need a feelings check. I didn't need my friends to shake their heads and give me the standard, what are you gonna do, right? I needed jokes. I needed Frank the Tank and earmuffs and Snoop-a-Loop. I needed the whole thing. And that's what I got from my friends that night. Now, the sadness was just waiting for me outside. On the drive home, I could feel it all building up again. Will Ferrell's great, but he can't cure mourning. But I appreciated the break. And I spent the next couple of days trying to figure out what I was going to say in this eulogy. You would think it would be easy to eulogize the greatest man you ever knew. But I didn't want to reduce my dad's life to a series of anecdotes, right? I didn't want to be cliche. I didn't want to be too somber, but I didn't want to be too light. So, suffice it to say, I was overthinking the whole thing. I just wanted it to be perfect. You can imagine the horror years later when I realized I had stolen a line from Jerry Maguire and put it in my dad's eulogy. I did not scream, "Show me the money!" That would have been weird and funny, but inappropriate, not good. I said, "These are cynical times," which is not a direct lift from the movie, but it's close enough, and my delivery was really very much Tom Cruise, late 90s. But I was trying to compare my dad to those cynical times, because he was anything but cynical. He had this sharp, quick, smart wit, but he never used it as a dagger. I don't think I ever heard my dad say a mean or vengeful thing on purpose in his life. So a couple days later, the funeral is here, and I genuflect, make the sign of the cross, and I'm standing in front of that pulpit, and remembering how good it felt to laugh with my friends, I did the only thing I could do. I started my father's eulogy with a funny story. And I apologized to the crowd. I said, You've probably, many of you have already heard this story, but you all knew my dad, so you're used to hearing the same funny story over and over again. And they all laughed, including the priest who was behind me, and I figured, okay, if he's laughing, I'm on safe ground. I could keep going here. So I told my funny story, which is really a joke in its structure. It's got a setup and a punchline, and just the rhythm. It goes like this. I was visiting home from college, and after a couple of years in New York City, I was very wise. So I was sharing my philosophy with my parents, which was, in life, you've got to take your shots. You've got to take your shots. When your moment comes, you've got to take your shots. That's how I live my life, Mom and Dad. I take my shots. And my dad said, sure, but you're using our bullets. Because he was good like that. And hearing that whole church fill with laughter, it felt exactly right. This was the tribute my dad deserved. Now, I went on to talk about him as, his sincerity, his integrity, his goodness, how he only referred to my mom by the name Dear, because that's what she was to him. I talked about him as good father, good friend, good human being. He was. We've all said at one time in our lives, I laughed until I cried. I think that week I had to cry until I could laugh. And it was wonderful to share that with all of those people, friends and family, who had cried plenty. And I think about how perfect a tribute that was to my dad, who certainly wasn't happy every day of his life. But he was always joyful. Thank you.